Okay. Aloha, everyone. It's 2 o'clock,
Yes.
so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the last presentation in the Honpa Hongwanji Mission of Hawaii's Triple Celebration Buddhist Education Series. My name is Debbie Kubota, and I will be your MC today. First of all, please remember to mute your mics when you are not speaking. Also, this online seminar is being recorded, so please turn off your camera if you don't want to be included in the recording. Today, it is my distinct honor to introduce our speaker, Reverend Jean Sekiya. Reverend Sekiya was born and raised in Fresno, California. He is currently a resident priest at Zen Noji Temple and a translator at Jodo Shinshu Hongwanji Ha. Today's topic is The World is Waiting for Buddhism and Shinran Shonin, Joy of the Nembutsu. Reverend Sekiya will share his presentation for 60 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. During the Q&A, if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat. Without further ado, I would like to turn the mic over to Reverend Sekiya.
Good morning, everyone. Well, to begin with, let me introduce myself and also make a correction on my profile that was issued for this series, speaker series. I'm Sansei from Fresno, California, and grew up in what was called the former Japanese Quarter, Japantown, or Nihonmachi, that was right next to Chinatown. I attended Fresno Betsuin Buddhist Temple and its Japanese language school. I was involved with the activities of Betsuin, the temples in the valley, and YBA and WYBL. My profile stated that I was a minister in Fresno, but I was not, only a member and helper. I was quite surprised when I was asked to speak at this Buddhist education speaker series in conjunction with Hawaii's Triple Celebration. There are many other ministers who are more knowledgeable and accustomed to delivering talks at important occasions such as this. After being asked, I received several texts from different ministers in Hawaii, many of whom I got to know while they were Kaikyoshi minister aspirants at Ryukoku University. And they asked and encouraged me to make the presentation for this series. I'm very honored and hope that I can expand your understanding of Jodo Shinshu by sharing what I've learned from many others, because there are many others out there who are waiting to receive it, and you could be the person that introduces it to them. While growing up in Fresno, I made many Dharma friends and other friends in the Central Valley community who became my teachers, mentors, confidants, and guides. Everyone was so willing to share their knowledge and instruct me on many different things. But moreover, they provided me with opportunities to realize and gain appreciation for those opportunities and things. In Japanese, this is called ajiwai, which has the nuance of flavor and flavorful. It possesses the meaning of enjoy, relish, aesthetic appeal, and profundity. This has brought me to the understanding that it is not merely learning how to perform or carry out something, but to gain deeper insight in its application in life. When you stop to think about it, this is the actual significance and purpose of our Jodo Shinshu tradition and the overall resolve of the Buddha's teaching. One key principle that was passed on to me is to learn the fundamentals to establish a firm foundation of understanding. The reason for this is because everything changes, as we know. But if your foundation is solid and your understanding is strong yet flexible, you will be able to adapt, adjust, and cope, making appropriate modifications according to situation, circumstance, and conditions, while upholding the fundamental intention and significance no matter where you are. This is the same for our Jodo Shinshu tradition. It is alive because it is able to make adjustments and adapt its rituals and customs while maintaining its fundamental core and principles. The Dharma manifests itself in myriad ways in life, and therefore for Buddhism, especially Jodo Shinshu, is likened to the guide in the art of living, because it enables people not only to cope with any and all incidents that come their way, but moreover, to thrive and flourish because of those incidents and experiences. I graduated from California State University, Fresno, where I received my degree in the sciences, specifically in environmental health, then later passed my state boards for receiving certification with the state of California. Fast forwarding, I left Fresno and the US soon after graduation and moved to Japan to begin working on the JEP program and a new adventure. To tell you the truth, I think that many of you likely know, I did not intend to enter ministry as my career in life, but consider it more of a natural outcome of things. When I began my contract in Hiroshima and my life in Japan, I wanted to make the best use of opportunities in order to learn a variety of things as I could before I had to return to the US, or so I thought. One was to become more accustomed to using Japanese on a regular daily basis. Another was to become immersed in Buddhism and daily culture. And the third, the more important one, was to learn things and understand them correctly so I could explain it to others so that they could receive and accept it correctly. During my time in Japan, I've come to realize that I took many things for granted. I was accustomed to attending gatherings and services regularly in the temple on weekends. Many of you know that this does not exist in Japan. Since this custom was adopted and incorporated into Jodo Shinshu when it became established overseas, I had to look into how I can continue with my own learning. Although there were early morning services at large temples every day, it usually is just chanting. Rather, services both formal and informal, as well as gatherings for study and discussion, are conducted as annual events or held as needed. An example, services include Dharma talks and discussions are conducted for 7 days during both spring and autumn Higan season at large temples and district head temples. In the past, I am told, nearly all temples did this as well. But nowadays, most have Higan service for only 1 or 2 days. Some only have it for 1. Some groups in the temple will meet weekly, like when I was attending the YBA gatherings on Friday and Saturday evenings in Hiroshima. They were generally informal discussions, but also include more serious study sessions during the year. Every event was organized, carried out by volunteers, and you can imagine, very similar to our events overseas. From the viewpoint of a spectator or outsider, there are many parts of the gathering or event that may seem a bit chaotic and disorderly, but things generally work out themselves, and afterwards, there's an opportunity to reflect, comment, and make suggestions for improvement without directing blame to anyone. One other venture that I began was to research the immigration of the Japanese and the beginning of propagation in Buddhism and Jodo Shinshu outside of Japan. For our temples and institutions overseas, the immigrant Issei laborers and their priests work together, helping each other to assimilate and adjust to their new land. The priests established English language classes, clubs, and associations for the Issei to channel their energies and efforts positively, thereby educating themselves, acquire various skills, and become accustomed to life in Hawaii without having to depend on others, such as the Christian missionaries. In addition, the people gathered at homes, halls, or even outside at a designated location to hold hoakai and zarankai for their religious and social needs. Fashioned after the YMCA and YWCA, the formation of the Young Men's Buddhist Association and Young Women's Buddhist Association that later combined and became the Young Buddhist Association and Hujinkai, or BWA, were also adjustments that later manifested themselves. When the homes and other places where people gathered soon became too small to accommodate everyone, people pooled their monies to rent or build their own public halls and community centers, which were the beginnings of our temples. They were places of refuge where the immigrants could go for support, solace, and comfort. This was made possible because of the concept some of you are familiar with, Tanomoshikai or Tanomoshiko, that arose during the agrarian society of Japan during the Kamakura period, the late 12th century, and it flourished during the Edo period, the 17th through the 19th centuries. Tanomoshi in Japanese means dependable and reliable. And this sort of loose-knit group was a way for farmers and others who did not have the financial means to pool their monies, thereby helping and sustaining each other. The so-called fund was used in turn, and no interest was charged, and this was returned to the group and allowed to grow. It was very likely that this concept, cooperative dependability and reliability, and reliability flourished together with the growth and expansion that Jodo Shinshu experienced at that time. This Tanomoshiko helped to strengthen the bonds and trust and mutual support between the members. The Issei used this system overseas because of that time, no banks or financial institution would lend them money. Reverend Imamura's endeavors to create a society for the Japanese within the greater society that mirrored the Anglo society instilled confidence and pride, and the willingness to develop and nurture the overall community. Others on the mainland were doing similar activities with comparable success. The priest served as a lifeline between Hawaii and Japan in many ways, ministering to the day-to-day needs of the uneducated and illiterate immigrants. This is one example of solidifying and fortifying the working of the Jodo Shinshu Sangha. In a new place, removed from the familiarity of their native land, sometimes small changes or adaptations were deemed important and incorporated right away. Others sometimes had to wait for a more opportune time. The early temples were created like those in Japan and had tatami or another form of mat on the floor so that everyone removed their footwear when entering and sat on the floor. This quickly changed to hardwood floors and chairs, and members and visitors kept their shoes on and sat on chairs or in pews. In not wanting to draw attention to themselves, as well as gain acceptance by the outside community, many of the temples and sanghas underwent a so-called churchification and adapted many aspects of Christian and Catholic churches. Many of you may know that the original or first temples were wooden structures in the traditional style, such as the first Hilo Hongwanji temple and the Koloa Hongwanji temple on Kauai. The Jodoshu temple nearby reflects this, although it has modifications, such as Western-style windows and the walls are painted. Some were built incorporating a combination of Japanese and Western architectural styles, which became popular in Japan during the Meiji period. Others also incorporated a plantation style of architecture. Both of the latter two styles were used in the first temple in Honolulu on Fort Lane. As a side note, the early temples on the mainland also used this combination of Japanese and Western architectural styles, namely where I am from. The original Fresno Buddhist temple was a wooden three-story structure erected in 1901 that incorporated this unique style. It had a temple-style roof, but covered in shingles. At the front, there was a broad staircase leading to the portico, or the covered porch, that extended around the left and right as a patio or lanai. The roof at the top of the stairs had a karahafu, or a curved roof line, which is typically found in Japanese architecture. This was amazingly similar to the original Hongwanji temple in Honolulu. The interior was entirely Western style, that of a Victorian-style mansion, save for the naijin on the third floor, which was from Japan. It had hardwood floors, a broad staircase inside with an ornately carved banister that ascended to the hondo on the third floor. Sadly, the temple was tragically destroyed by fire on May 28, 1919. The Sangha and Japanese community rallied together and rebuilt the temple in concrete in 1920, retaining the same basic features. No matter the locale, I believe that the underlying feeling of the Sangha members was to erect and maintain a dignified structure to the best of their abilities so that all would be proud and show due respect to the Buddhist teaching. I want to point out something that maybe you folks in Hawaii take for granted, or maybe don't notice anymore. The incorporation of flooring and the use of chairs in the temple hondo naturally brought about a creation of adaptation in the Naijin altar area. While wanting to incorporate the convenience of sitting in a chair for the minister, much consideration was given to maintaining the underlying concept and wish to preserve the same austere atmosphere of appearing to sit seiza or Japanese style on the floor, and also would not hinder the ability to perform the same movements during rituals and ceremonies that were traditionally executed while sitting on the floor. In Hawaii, the result was that of the central altar was elevated onto a raised dais or platform, and the low or short-legged sutra tables were placed on the platform, but the chairs for the ministers to sit were on the lower level. Take a look at your temples when you have a chance, and you'll see this. Note that this unique consideration was not given or applied to the Naijin altar in the temples on the continental US. In most temples, the ministers enter the Naijin from the entrance behind the central altar, as is done in Japan. Due to the strong influence of various Asia and Pacific Islander communities, the practice of removing shoes before entering a dwelling or building was commonplace. For myself, I was pleasantly surprised when I attended summer session in 1982 and found that there were still some temples on Oahu where you removed your shoes before going into the hondo. There still may be some temples in Hawaii district that do this, but as far as I know, none do this on the mainland. Even today, Hawaii ministers remove their shoes when entering the Naijin. In the Buddhist churches of America, many temples have begun or restarted this practice. Temples that were established or rebuilt later came to incorporate more Western or Central Asia and Gandharan design, such as Hawaii Betsuin. Some temple groups purchased former Christian or Catholic churches, then modified and redecorated them to suit their purposes. Some temple groups on the mainland, and likely in similar fashion in Hawaii and other locations around the world where the Issei settled, shared buildings for their own religious and cultural purposes. This may have been because it was located on a plantation or other agricultural cooperative. They were in essence what we call in Japanese kominkan, or community centers and public halls. There were many instances when both Buddhist and Christian groups shared the same building for their religious services, as well as the Japanese language school and cultural classes. Although there were occurrences of dislike and disagreement between organizations in different areas, these I feel were excellent examples of mutual dependability, reliability, and support that pervaded in the ethnic Japanese community. Over time, the gender ratio began to shift with the arrival of picture brides, and the community continued to grow and evolve with the subsequent emergence of the Nisei generation. The needs of the Japanese immigrants changed with it, so the number and variety of groups diversified and increased because parents and families wanted their children to receive education in Japanese language and cultural customs, and provide opportunities for celebrations, observances, and rituals, as well as interaction with Western society. The temple leaders fostered those needs by creating gatherings for children and young mothers, women's study classes and associations, youth groups, and education institutions. Hawaii was unique because the Kyodan created not only Japanese language schools, but also its own independent type of public school for educating children. The fortitude to create a school was a natural outcome that arose from knowing and acknowledging the conditions and situation of the time, namely discrimination and economic educational disparity, then formulating and executing strategies to cope with them. The Terakoya system, which had existed in Japan and other Asian nations that were predominantly Buddhist, was adopted, developed, and expanded. The Terakoya system consisted of children being taken to the temple where they received a portion or all of their education for living. As all of you are aware, the school evolved and expanded with the passage of time, becoming the Hongwanji Mission School and Pacific Buddhist Academy of today. On the mainland, they decided to create the Institute of Buddhist Studies to further all people's education of the Buddhist teaching. Japanese ethnic communities on the mainland took a different approach, as with the litigation of the San Francisco Board of Education school segregation case in 1906. Hand in hand with this, the focus of nurturing Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, and English became increasingly important. This is where I sort of fall into this. Interest from the outside of the Sangha and Japanese community began to appear. Thus began the need for proper and accurate translations and explanations in English of the Buddha Dharma and Jodo Shinshu. Much of this task was left up to individual ministers or lay people who had received some formal education. When it was possible, much information and instructional material was shared by the overseas districts. On the one hand, when each district produced their own version or translation of a recitation or excerpt from a sutra, such as Namo Kie Butsu, Namo Kie Ho, Namo Kie So, one might think that it was a lot of wasted effort for everyone to always be, quote unquote, reinventing the wheel. On the other hand, however, the resulting translations, I put my faith in Buddha, or I take refuge in Buddha, and I rely on the Buddha, provide subtly different interpretation and understanding for the individual. In this way, through reading and using various translations, one is able to gain deeper knowledge and realization of the significance of the passage. Through my own translation work, I have come across several words, terms, and concepts that are quite difficult to translate succinctly because there may not exist a comparable example in English. And so those words require a more roundabout approach and lengthier explanation that includes a transliteration. As I have mentioned earlier, as times change, language and its usage changes too. New words and phrases come into existence as well. One that everyone is familiar with is the word or term Dharma school. When the change from Buddhist Sunday school to Dharma school was initiated sometime in the late 70s or early 80s, I believe, there was discussion, but actually little or no resistance. I think it was an example of the fruition of both the concept of political correctness that was gaining momentum at the time, as well as the actualization of self-reflection on equality and who we are as Buddhists. Originally, the Dharma school system, as you know, was created to mirror Christian Sunday school, but it has and continues to evolve. While some basic aspects and facts of general Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, may be acquired academically, the Sangha and involvement in its activities is the venue, means, and bridge that enables one to connect and encounter the working of the Buddha Dharma. This applies to any living language. The meaning and usage of words changes and evolves. We are all aware of some new popular meanings and usage that came about for words and phrases, which were actually lesser known or minor definitions for those words. Some words and phrases, especially those introduced into a new language from a different one, embody a broader conceptual entity and are more compact for usage than a lengthy and detailed translation and explanation. Such is the case for Namo Amida Butsu. Of course, however, some sort of translation is necessary. Although most of us understand this simply to mean, I entrust myself to Amida Buddha, there is an excellent and thorough explanation in the publication, Jodo Shinshu Guide. Allow me to read it to you. Namo Amida Butsu is neither a Japanese nor Chinese phrase. It is a transliteration of the Sanskrit phrase Namos Amita Buddha. No effort was made to translate it into either Chinese or Japanese or English. The term mida means to measure. When the negating prefix of a is added to create amida, it has the meaning incapable of being measured. As to what cannot be measured, it is light and life, which is only implied to the complete phrase Namo Amida Butsu. The light that cannot be measured, immeasurable life, a light, symbolizes higher wisdom, and the life that cannot be measured, immeasurable life, symbolizes compassion. Butsu is the Japanese way of pronouncing Buddha, which literally means a being who has awakened. A Butsu is also referred to as Nyorai or Tathagata in Sanskrit, which means thus come. A Nyorai is a being who has come from thusness to liberate the sentient beings of the world. Accordingly, if Amida Butsu were to be translated into English, it would approximate, quote, the awakened being of immeasurable higher wisdom and immeasurable compassion who has come from thusness to bring about our emancipation, unquote. The term Namo, with which the phrase begins, means to rely upon, to entrust to salute, to honor. The complete phrase Namo Amida Butsu therefore means I entrust myself to and rely solely upon the awakened being of immeasurable higher wisdom and immeasurable compassion who has come from thusness to bring about my emancipation. You must clearly understand, however, that although the term Namo does have the meaning such as to rely upon and entrust to, that reliance, entrusting, and so on does not come from ourselves. So we are deluded and easily led astray. Unless this is understood, we will not appreciate the spirit of Namo Amida Butsu. Actually, the necessary reliance and entrusting has already been accomplished on the part of Amida Buddha. That is why the name of the Buddha already has contained within it the driving force of bringing about our complete liberation. Shinran states that Namo means that Amida Buddha is calling out to us even before we have entrusted ourselves to Amida Buddha. Nevertheless, the great meritorious matter of attaining awakening, both aspiration and practice are necessary. However, how can we arouse such desires and perform practices, unaware and deluded as we are? It is doubtless and impossible. That is why the being of immeasurable higher wisdom and immeasurable compassion took the form of great desire, that is Namo, the Buddha's wish and intention, and great practice, Amida Butsu, and acted to bring about our liberation through vow power. This activity for our benefit is referred to as merit transference of the Buddha-centered power. With that said, I would like to somewhat change my course of my talk. There are many issues and tasks that Hongwanji and our temples and sanghas in the overseas district must continue to cope with, as many of our ministers, lay members, and leaders have had to do. Some of those issues have been around since Buddhism was transplanted in the West, while others are new and have not been encountered before today, since there are more varied interests, influences, and diversions, both good and bad, than in the past. However, the fundamental issues which we have had to cope with since the beginning of humanity's history have not changed much. On the other hand, there's a growing interest by people all over the world to search for a path or the path that suits them, rather than merely following a particular religion or belief system under which they were reared as children. And because of this, there are many opportunities to share our Jodo Shinshu teaching than ever before. Some people are disillusioned or have come to distrust a judgmental thought of some beliefs or feel that it is outdated and no longer relevant in today's world. Overall, there's a trend that many people worldwide feel less obligated to simply continue attending a church or religious organization just because it was the one they grew up attending as children. There are also many other diversions that some may find more intriguing or supposedly more in tune with their needs. Our organization as well, unfortunately, has been influenced by this too. From what I have seen, people come to the temple and to Jodo Shinshu for many different reasons. Some take it for granted since they were reared as children to attend the temple. Some come because of obligatory means. Others come for the social and cultural activities, while some are drawn to the religious academic aspect only. As times continue to change at an ever-accelerating pace, people's needs are also changing and differentiating vastly just as quickly. There is a definite need to propagate our Jodo Shinshu teaching and tradition to show its relevance, not only to our youth, but more so to the general public. This includes, of course, the methods and venues, as well as addressing demographics. There are still socio-cultural differences, though sometimes it may be considered religious influenced cultural differences, or even generational differences. As I've stated earlier, the format in which Buddhism and Jodo Shinshu are presented in our temples in Hawaii and North America were adopted with the desire to be accepted by the outside community, or as a reaction to the situation of the larger society. However, I feel the underlying role of the Sangha and community remain a strong draw for Buddhism. On the other hand, the cultural aspect has been and will continue to be an important yet somewhat problematic factor. Some people are drawn to the temple and the Sangha because of the Japanese and overall Asiatic cultural flavor, while others may find it confusing and not to their liking. Therefore, for other religions as well, there are cultural, ethnically centered religious groups or associations in order to minister to the members of the diversified congregation that still choose to maintain a certain level or degree of culturally related distinction. We cannot and should not ignore or dismiss this. I feel that this may become an important strategy that our temples will have to consider and incorporate more seriously. We do have to keep in mind that the overall format, the culture of the temple and the Sangha should always be centered on Buddhist tradition and culture. It is evident that all people, to a certain degree, are hesitant to change for whatever reason. However, the struggling that we have been coping with over the history of propagation in our overseas districts is an indication that change is occurring even at this moment. One possible solution is through more involvement and interaction of the Sangha at large. For me, the Sangha has always been extended family because we members share the commonness of the Dharma in our lives. More and more, as society and all societies in general become more secular or nuclear family oriented, there will be a greater need and yearning in our lives for those bonds of religion and family, no matter the composition of the type of family unit. I think by instilling an understanding of the Dharma through education, example, activities, and involvement is still very important. To me, this was truly what we call engaged Buddhism, though the term was not around at that time. From my own experience, it was those Buddhist ceremonies and observances to mark the various rites of passage in life, centered on the activities of the temple and family that made me feel I belonged to and am engaged in the Sangha. Further, observing and witnessing everyone actively participating and supporting the activities of the temple instills and reinforces in everyone, both new and interested persons, and also seasoned members, the importance of dana to the temple for the benefit of all and the building of community. Everyone's involvement nurtures the feeling that we all have an vested interest in the well-being of the Sangha and the temple. The working together for the benefit of the temple, be it attendance at religious services, participation in bazaars and fundraisers, enrolling in Buddhist education classes, or organizing other venues such as outreach to create more public awareness of the existence of the temple and Sangha, is the engagement and actualization of the Nembutsu in our everyday lives. The dynamic of the Sangha itself is our Jodo Shinshu dojo, and I learned this from a now retired minister in Southern District. The embodiment and manifestation of the working of Nembutsu and the Bodhisattva practice. All activities, be they study sessions, bazaars, fundraising gatherings, food festivals, involvement in social issues, and the like will continue to adapt and change. A friend of mine, Michiko Inanaga, posted on her Facebook a quote that I feel expresses this appropriately. This quote by Janice Hirohama, who is a minister's assistant at the Buddhist church Orange County Buddhist Church, which is in the Los Angeles area. Although she used it to describe the Bon Dance, the festival of joy, it succinctly and accurately illustrates the dojo of the Nembutsu. Quote, "It opens our hearts and minds by moving us into the realm of experiencing rather than thinking," unquote. On this point, I would like to recommend and encourage all members to become involved with welcoming, sharing, discussing, and nurturing, especially new persons who show an interest in the Sangha. This is the idea of everyone listening, everyone hearing, everyone sharing the working of Namo Amida Butsu. Or in other words, as one translation of the Eko, the part that the merit of transfer of merit that we recite at the end of sutras states, "May we share these virtues equally with one and all, and together attain birth in the land of bliss." In order to do this, further in-depth study and education will play a key role, and we will need to nurture eloquence and adeptness in our priests, ministers, leaders, and lay members in order to properly transmit the correct understanding of those Jodo Shinshu concepts. Defining, redefining, expanding the understanding by the members without straying too far from the actual meaning or going off on a tangent, and the approaching from different viewpoints are all necessary. Another vital point is to use grassroots terms, but not neglecting continuing education so that all individuals become familiar with the Buddhist, Sanskrit, Chinese, and technical terms. The reason for this is simple, as I stated earlier with the example of Namo Amida Butsu. Those terms may be translatable into English, but they may not be succinct and usable in sentences and paragraphs. Our intent and effort should be focusing on bringing the Dharma home, making people comfortable with it, and recognizing its presence in their lives, and enabling them to realize that there are both academic and also abstract aspects, such as culture and tradition, that ought to be a part of everyday life. Interaction and discussion with others, members, both ministers and lay people, is equally important because it does create bonds with the Sangha members in intangible ways. Furthermore, we should also constantly ask ourselves, are we adequately and successfully selecting appropriate persons to become those leaders, and subsequently providing them with opportunities to hone their skills and abilities and increase their knowledge or enable them to do through other means. Another important point is enabling Jodo Shinshu to adapt and integrate into the local culture. As I stated earlier, our temples overseas have been coping with this task from day one, when services were conducted in their locale, and have been continuing to do so gradually and naturally as needed. Maybe there is a need or desire to facilitate this more, but it has to be done naturally, not forcibly. When the Dharma reached China and Korea, Southeast Asia, and Japan, it took many centuries of gradual integration to become such things as Chinese Buddhism and Korean Buddhism. Buddhism in the West has been there for only about a century and a half at best. Therefore, I feel that more research, study, and consideration of the key elements that underpin the Dharma, especially Jodo Shinshu, truly need to continue to be carried out to address the vastly different needs in the West. Caution needs to be heeded periodically and continuously to avoid making rash and radical decisions, such as arbitrarily eliminating seemingly meaningless rituals and ceremonies. I feel that through proper understanding and acceptance of the significance and reverence for the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, will our temples be able to enable continuance and transformation of existing rituals so that their meanings can be properly transmitted. Praising the virtues of the Buddha, presentation and contribution of offerings for the promotion of the spread of the Dharma, and cooperative initiation for the harmony and cohesiveness of the Sangha are concepts that become a part of a person's being through involvement. This is a core concept of Buddhism, no matter the language or cultural means used. During my time at the Hongwanji International Center Department, I have assisted with many sessions of Tokudo ordination. My ministerial aspirants from overseas. As you are well aware, the diversity of background is amazing, and it will continue to diversify even further. This reflects what we are seeing in our sanghas. There are persons who are born into Jodo Shinshu families, some who started out that way, then left for a while, but have returned. There are some who are from other ethnic and religious backgrounds, who were first introduced to Jodo Shinshu and the Dharma because of marriage, but have come to accept it as their own tradition. And there are others who began by following other traditions of Buddhism, then later came to discover more relevance and practicality in Shinran's teaching. One very difficult aspect that Jodo Shinshu and Buddhism has to face is attempting to enable people to go beyond what's called the American ego. The individualism, do it yourself, and you just aren't trying hard enough attitude has its own merit in certain contexts, but it misses the mark when Buddhism is revealing one's own possibilities as well as limitations to us. One other somewhat tenacious and sensitive topic or issue is the cultural, ethnic, educational boundary. I've mentioned this earlier, but it is one that is apparent in all religions worldwide. For some people, they feel more comfortable or reassured with others of their own background, whatever definition that entails. To some degree, there will always be a need for the so-called ethnic religious associations to satisfy that innate desire or need. Another issue is the degree to the interpretation of a certain tradition of the Buddha Dharma that a particular Sangha follows. Hongwanji, and therefore its established organizations overseas, follow a somewhat orthodox and straightforward interpretation of Shinran's teaching. In no way do I mean this disparagingly, but for other groups that have arisen, both in Japan and other parts of the world, they seem to have incorporated his teaching along with other traditions of Buddhism. And in doing so, there are some contradictions that occur. Again, I'm not really sure what many people, when they say they want to develop a sort of American-style Buddhism, I don't know what this meaning is. I'm not sure if we can actually develop one. Rather, I think that as Buddhism has traversed the globe, it has become acknowledged and accepted, and the local culture adapted itself around Buddhist culture, and it evolved spontaneously, naturally, and unpretentiously. It must be allowed to occur naturally, implemented into the lives of the persons and groups who wish to follow it, and thereby perpetuated and put into practice in that locale as it has been done for the last 150 years in the West. As I mentioned earlier, the adaptations and incorporation by the Hongwanji temples in the overseas district is an example. It is a local, cultural, influenced temple setting that is a unique mix of the strong influence from not only Japan, but all of Asia and the West. For Hongwanji in the overseas districts, as well as Honzan, we are continuing to offer opportunities to learn more about Buddhism and Jodo Shinshu through various venues, such as the online education correspondence course and the Institute of Buddhist Studies program for persons who live in areas where there are no Jodo Shinshu temples nearby. Some temples have begun their own outreach and satellite centers where gatherings are held once or twice a month. There are also the Minister's Assistant Program, IMA, I Hope and We Hope, and Youth Advocacy Program by the BCA that provides opportunities to become involved in addition to encouraging others to do likewise. They allow for personal growth, interaction, and communication with like-minded individuals and development of new methods for future propagation. This special Buddhist education series, speaker series in conjunction with your triple celebration provides yet more opportunities to hear, share, and just discuss the Nembutsu and Amita's compassionate working. The BSc summer session was suggested to me when I wanted to attend summer school at UH and spend the entire summer of my freshman year in Oahu. In short, it was a wonderful and the best summer of my life. It was a summer when I began to truly understand the meaning of the Japanese term goen. Thanks to the Sangha of the Honpa Hongwanji mission of Hawaii, I have learned and discovered so much that has helped me on this journey of life and have made many wonderful friends that I truly have ohana there. And it continues to expand. With our understanding firmly planted in correct understanding of Shinran's teaching, we will be able to promote deeper recognition of the universal truth of Buddhism and the suitability and applicability of Jodo Shinshu in the lives of people from all walks of life. As we move forward in developing new methods of promoting Jodo Shinshu, it is also possible to nurture the bonds that underlie the Sangha and maintain the feeling of the Jodo Shinshu community, as well as the greater Buddhist community now and for the future. Allowing and enabling a diversity of expression of reverence for the Buddha Dharma is a task that the teaching has faced as it traversed the continents. The composition and dynamics of our Sangha will continue to diversify and evolve. We need to let this occur naturally, not forcefully. I believe that through our involvement in the Sangha, we truly become examples not only for our own family, but also for others who wish to join our Sangha. Some will join for the social aspect, but indeed, more people will enter the Sangha for the right reasons. The focus of identity and heritage of our temple should always be centered on Buddhist culture, tradition, and community. The positive outcome is the increase in social and political activism and awareness and humanitarian acts that have their fundamental core in Buddhist principles. Again, I want to stress that participants need to have a strong foundation in their understanding of Buddhist principles and Jodo Shinshu concepts. Otherwise, their actions could result in bringing about more misunderstanding and harm rather than good. To summarize this first portion of my talk, I want to reiterate a few points. Key concepts that Buddhism provides us with: foundational skills and values, not mere dogmatic do's and don'ts. The Buddha Dharma is descriptive, not prescriptive, in that the simple and constant message that Jodo Shinshu is telling us is for us to be aware of the here and now and cope with it. There is no magic, mysticism, or strange self-depriving rituals to follow. And as everyone is aware, Buddhism, and especially Jodo Shinshu, is for everyone, not just the Japanese and not just for ethnic Asians. The teaching is universal and applicable for all people. We can be more active in our sharing and teaching and willingly speak out to others to encourage deeper understanding of our beliefs and outlook on life. We need to overcome our own stereotypes and misconceptions and guide others to the correct and same understanding. We also need to heed caution in not applying other stereotypes that have no relevance on the Buddha's teaching and tradition. Okay, so that is the more formal part of my talk. Here, since I know a lot of people in Hawaii and also on the mainland who like the mode of talk story, this is my talk story time for you. And I will relate it to some of the points I presented earlier. While I was growing up, I had always been told that Jodo Shinshu is a way of life rather than a religion. Why? All of the routines and regular actions are performed for preparing us for our everyday life. And I often use this example to the participants who come for Ibixi. It's similar to learning to tie your shoe or to sign your name. Let me ask you, are you able to remember the person or persons who taught you how to do this correctly and properly? Likely not, although you might be able to think of maybe one or two persons. This teaches us that in the constant, repetitive practicing of these actions, it becomes innate in us, a second nature. And when we think about it even more deeply, we might become a bit more appreciative for all the persons that we cannot recall who helped us in our life. One other thing this teaches is that if we shirk our responsibility and cheat ourselves by not practicing these things, as is often the case, then we can't do them smoothly or proficiently. This is where discipline is necessary, both self-discipline and receiving an evaluation by someone else. Such is the case when I was growing up. I know that in Hawaii, people remove their shoes constantly. So many folks leave their sneakers and dress shoes tied and simply just slide into them and slide out of them. This is very true for the Japanese. And I have seen that although many Japanese are able to tie a bow knot, it takes them a little while and is not done as easily as others who tie their shoes daily. In regard to the Jodo Shinshu tradition, especially for our members who have a butsudan at home, they're accustomed to such things as putting their hands together in gassho, bowing, performing oshoko at the temple and other locations when necessary, and also placing and removing offerings and sharing them with others. On this point, because we're Buddhist, and also likely because of general Asian culture, when it comes to food, I think we have our own view of sharing it. I know that all cultures have their own variation, but I think ours is rooted in Buddhism. Here, I need to back up slightly and give some background of a comparison view. It may be different in Hawaii than on the mainland because of the makeup of the general population. I want you to think about your own experiences. Think about when you have attended potlucks that were work-related or school-related in comparison to those at the temple, family, or even Asian-related gatherings, such as for Budo, martial arts clubs. For the work and school-related potlucks, generally, there was barely enough food to go around, especially if you were the last ones to go up to get your food. For others, especially temple gatherings, I think we all know that there's lots and lots of leftovers, and everyone was asked to take a plate of leftovers home. This is also the similar situation when friends go out to eat. Sometimes someone will covertly pick up the check and pay for everyone's meal. Reverend Jan, if you're listening, I'm talking about you, okay? I believe that this phenomenon is because of the underlying concept of Buddhist dana, or fuse in Japanese. Translated, the first character, fu, which can also be read as nuno, has the meaning of cloth, but also the inference of spreading widely, such as when a huge cloth is spread out. The second character is read as se, or hodokosu. This has the meaning of giving, kindness, benefaction, and almsgiving. Therefore, it is the spreading of kindness and benefaction to as many people as possible. That's why in English, just the word fuse is donation, but the meaning is more profound. I want to add that we should not feel that we have to refrain or feel shy about expressing such thing as putting our hands together in gassho before meals and after meals, even in public, or even put our hands together if we were attending a funeral for a friend who is of a different faith. The important thing to keep in mind is the feeling with which it is done when you are doing it. One other example that slightly varies from this is the making of resolutions. How many of you do this? That's a rhetorical question for you to ponder. Why do we do this? When is it most appropriate to make resolutions? Are they necessary? Overall, I think we make resolutions as a way for improving the self. It does not need to be done merely at the end of the year or the beginning of the year, but it should be done constantly. I want to include that often, unconsciously, we also create another type of list, a sort of checkoff list of our achievements and the good things that we did. My suggestion is that we also think about the flip side of this in a more Buddhistic manner as to further ourselves in self-improvement. In addition to that list, we ought to reflect on ourselves and recall all of the things, opportunities, and times we were unable to do good for whatever reason. and promise ourselves, pledge, or vow to endeavor to do so whenever the opportunity arises again. This is a technique in the art of living, and I've heard this from many, many of my friends, older friends especially, that now they are able to do this. That's why they do this. Second story I would like to talk about is what I call the identity of self as a Buddhist. When I was a child, I often spent a lot of time at Bachan's home, my grandma's home, helping her with things around the house. At that time, she lived in a modest home in the old Chinatown, Japantown area, where you could see the roof of the betsuin if you went outside to the front of the house. In her home, she had many old photos and albums that I would often look through and ask her about. Some were of the village where she grew up, and others were family and relatives. The larger portion, of course, was of her life in Fresno. In one, there was a family photo of the family home in the village in the mountains of Hiroshima, and you could see the village temple in the distance beyond the many rice fields. I remember her telling me that she always wanted to live where she could see the roof of the temple, just like her home in Japan. It's kind of amusing to me that this is now my own living situation here in Japan. One old picture was a group photo of what looked like some sort of class in front of a Christian church. When I asked her about it, she said it was the English class she attended when she first moved to Fresno, and the lady who was her teacher was Miss Brown. Most of the people were young women, and I recognized only 2 or 3 of them. So I asked her about the others. She said, yes, this is A-san, this is N-san, and this is K-san. What about these other ladies? Oh, this is B-san, this is T-san, and I can't recall her name. But they're all Christian. That's why you don't know them. Oh, really? I said. They became Christian? Why? Maybe they felt thankful or obligated for teaching us English. I continued, then Bachan, why didn't you do the same and become Christian? To this, she simply smiled and said, because I'm Buddhist. I have to add that I distinctly remember that she said it in this way and not because our family is Buddhist. Quite amazing, I think, for an Issei lady to say, I am a Buddhist. I didn't realize why until much, much later. I recall reading in one of Fresno Betsuin's commemorative history books that Bachan had become a member in the 1920s, soon after arriving in Fresno, and was involved with the Fujinkai, now known as BWA, for many years and in many ways, having many close friends, close lifelong friends. My grandparents had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Their first child was Nobuko. Unfortunately, she died in 1921 at the age of 2.5, likely a fatality associated with the global pandemic of the time, 100 years ago, which took a long time to end. I found a slip of paper in the small Butsudan that I inherited, which was in Bachan's room. I thought it could be Nobuko's homyo, or Buddhist name, so I contacted Fresno to ask, because I wanted to honor her in some way for the 100th year. The minister who wrote said in the Kakoto register, they were able to verify it. And there was also a short memo that they conducted the traditional 7-day services. Very likely, the ministers and ladies looked after her and comforted her and Ji-chan. And this brought about the awakening in her, the identity that I am a Buddhist. So it was very likely that the Nembutsu teaching, together with the interaction and nurturing by the Fujinkai ladies and other Sangha members, that solidified her conviction, which she endeavored to pass along to others and to me. This third story I call Thus I Have Heard. Yes, this is from the sutras, but I've added and pass along to you. I mentioned earlier that there were many Issei that were friends of my family who had much knowledge to pass along to everyone in the community. One time I was again at Bachan's home and she had friends that were coming over for a visit, as was often the case. So I asked who was coming. And I recall she said, Otogiya-san, Otogiya-san. That name didn't sound familiar, but I didn't think anything of it. To some of you, you might be familiar with that word. It is an old word that means storyteller. It's not someone's last name. This elderly gentleman, and actually the whole group of men and ladies, all like to tell stories of the past. At the time, I think I was about 6. I was just beginning to go to Japanese language school. So when I didn't want to listen any longer, I could just sort of turn it off and zone out. But I think many of you know, exposure and persistence is a strange thing. I found out that after many occasions such as this, I couldn't turn it off anymore. Some of these elderly people were so friendly that they would quite literally come right up to my face and continue talking to me as if I could comprehend everything. I heard some stories enough times that I knew them well and even began to ask about more details. Little by little, I was receiving lessons in not only Japanese, but of their stories, of their experiences in Fresno, and also their understanding and appreciation of Jodo Shinshu in their lives. They had made the most of their situation amidst the discrimination that pervaded in the Central Valley of California back then. However, due to prejudice and discrimination, although Asians and other ethnic groups could not purchase or live in certain areas and were regulated to live in enclaves that created Chinatown and Japantown, it had a reverse effect, a very positive one. It helped to create a very strong bond between the people who lived there. Maybe you're familiar, I know you're familiar with the word Chinatown, but how about Japantown? You may not know what this is or have any concept of what this is. When I was in Hawaii for summer session in 1982, I explored all over Honolulu and Oahu. It was the greatest adventure for me. Many of you very likely know of my good friend who is like a sister to me there. I will call her Lorna. This is because I promised Laura that I would not use her real name. Okay, Laura? Because Lorna grew up in town and knew it well. She often drove me there, here and there, wherever I wanted to go. I went to explore Chinatown often since I grew up in one. And also since it is mentioned in Michener's book, Hawaii, and also Hawaii Kyodan's history book. I remember asking Lorna, where is the Japantown? I received such a quizzical look from her, along with the question, what's that? When I gave my explanation using Little Tokyo in LA and Japantown in San Francisco, her answer was, it's all over. It's everywhere. Now it was my turn to return the quizzical look. I came to realize that although we are speaking the same language, if there is no relevance or understanding of the background of the term or phrase, then the message does not go through. I've always tried to keep this valuable lesson in mind when I'm doing my translation work. Moreover, the passage of time affects the use of language also. In that summer of 1982, I was fondly called the Kotonk from Fresno. Ministers were called Bonsan, and the ones from Japan especially were sometimes called Buddha head. Nowadays, when I introduce myself to the participants of Ibixi, I say that I am Sansei Koton. But I get quizzical looks from everyone, even from the kids from Hawaii. So sadly, some words are falling out of use. But this is where it's our responsibility to make sure that at least the meaning remains. So what am I now? Kotonk? Buddha head? Kamaaina? Lorna says, nah, you just Jean.
Reverend Jean, it's time
Yes.
for a break. Is this a good
Okay,
time for you?
sure, that's fine.
Okay. All right, everyone, we will take a 5-minute break. It's 3:06 right now, so I'd like
Okay.
to ask everyone to come back at 3:11.
Okay.
If you want to take some time during the break to put a question in the chat, that would be great. So we'll see you back at 3:11. Okay, I'd like to call everyone back from their break. I have 3:11 according to my clock. And Reverend Jean, do you have
Yes,
more talk story things to share, or would you like to go into the Q&A?
I do have I want to finish this one that I was in the middle of. So during that summer, I went to Jikoen for the bone dance and had a wonderful experience there. The food was delicious. One of the men who had also attended the summer session was there, and he handed me andagi. And I said, oishii. To which he said, no, say ono. What? No, say oishii. You say ono. More better, you say real ono. Then he said, I sansei too, you koton, but we both Japanese. But you try to say ono, become local. I still remember Mr. Sozen Yogi from Maui, his gentle smile and the acceptance in it, his desire to share his heritage with me, and his settled confidence in himself. This has had a huge and positive effect on me, of which I am appreciative to this day. One other I'll just touch on it briefly, but there, Reverend Midori Kondo, when she returned to Hilo after finishing her studies in Kyoto, asked me if I would translate something for her. And it was a letter that was the property of the Hawaii Shima Japanese Immigrant Museum. And it was fashioned in the same style as Renyo Shonin's Kobunsho, composed by an unknown author. It's rather long, so I won't go into it that much as I had hoped. But this author, it reflects his understanding of Jodo Shinshu and his background in it, as well as the use of pidgin, and also the desire to leave in some sort of form, the feelings of hardship and tribulations that the author and other immigrant plantation folks faced at that time. It's dated, I have to say, because some of the pidgin words and local words are no longer in regular use, such as calabash, I think, and hanai, and now it's more ohana, calaboose. And so this too, but it's interesting, and then it shows this was their way of expressing their situation in life, but then also kind of moving forward with it. If any are interested, I may send a copy of this to headquarters, and you can use it as you please. But I think you first need to try to find out where it came from so that you can cite it correctly. I've received several email, and so in the chat, so I'm going to address them.
Would you like me to read them for you?
Oh, would you please?
Yes. So from Dexter Marr, we have some questions.
Okay.
So Dexter asks, as a person with perspectives on Shin Buddhism in Japan and international locations, does Nishi Hongwanji emphasize Shinran's teachings enough, or has the uniqueness of Shinran's perspectives been normalized to accommodate general Buddhism?
In answer to this question, well, Hongwanji, we attempt to provide enough information for our ministers to emphasize Shinran's teachings. However, the situation is different than in Japan because most locales do not have the general Buddhist culture that is found here in Asia. And so a lot of it is left up to our Hongwanji ministers to sort of set a Buddhist foundation, and then after that approach Jodo Shinshu. That's why other venues can be used, such as this, to talk more about Shinran's teaching and not necessarily always have to build on the foundation of just general Buddhism. In the correspondence course, I've used that Hongwanji is like the great library in Alexandria. It's where everyone can come to study. That's why it's the library that's there. The resources are there. Everyone can come study there and then take what they need back with them. Hopefully we are sending, and enough persons are coming from overseas to do their studies, so that it's not just general Buddhism that's being taught, but more that it's Shinran's teaching that we're emphasizing.
Okay. So Dexter continues with his questions. He asks, has Shinran been considered too radical for today's Hongwanji?
Oh, no, by no means.
Okay. And should we more thoroughly distinguish Shin Buddhism from other Buddhist paths going forward?
I think it has to be double-pronged, because some people, unless you have a foundation in Buddhism, it it may be difficult for newcomers or persons who've crossed over to understand. If they already have an understanding of general Buddhism, generally, I have to say, it's easier to pick up and go. However, coming from a different tradition does not have its deficits either, because sometimes, as we all know, when we start something new, we don't just abandon what we've been doing up until that time, because it's become a part of us. It's just a matter of sifting through it and making sure within our own minds which part is from the tradition we left behind opposed to Jodo Shinshu. I hope that's understandable. As I had in my talk, that a lot of the education overall in Buddhism, that's why it was a way of life, was in the home. The priest, the minister came to conduct services in the home. And so it became routine to have services on Jichan's, the day of his passing, every month, to have Higan service in the home, or gatherings together with different families together, and on a daily basis. That's why the placing of the offering of rice, or whatever offerings, presents, gifts that people brought when they came to visit in front of the Butsudan, and then later not only putting them up, but taking them down and dividing it, sharing it with everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
Hi, Sensei.
Hello.
Hi, Gay.
Hello. If nobody else has a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
Oh, by the way, I was in Fresno last October.
Oh, good for you. Was it too hot?
It was October, so no, it wasn't hot at all. It was a lovely,
Okay.
lovely weather. I found a lot of old pictures of my family going back to the war and before that.
Oh, good.
So you said people should be, that we should be educated so that we don't teach the wrong, it was a passing reference, so that we're not perpetuating misunderstandings.
Right, right. It's easy to add your own interpretation of something, but it also, how do I put it? You need to, just like the example of my using Japantown, someone who has no idea of this concept, the word is in English, but they can misinterpret it. And so some people have described Chinatown, Japantown, Germantown as ghettos. And we also have other meanings associated with that word ghetto. meaning it's derelict, it's run down, but not necessarily they were that way. Living in the old Japantown, when we were still living there, yeah, places were closing. There were a lot of places that no longer were in business, but mom and dad had us go every morning, sweep the front, sweep the gutters, sweep the street, wash it down, and all the other merchants that were there were doing the same thing. So it was clean. It wasn't a rundown, derelict place until much, much later. So knowing how you explain it, how it's going to affect someone else's understanding of it. When I've heard, and amusingly, when non-Buddhists would come to our house, they would see the Butsudan there, and they'd have no idea what it is. And so I know some other children, well, children being children, they said, oh, it's Buddha's house. Well, yeah, in a way it is. But if you just use that term, it could be misleading too.
Then to what extent is there merit in encouraging youth to figure out their own definition so they have their own answer of what Jodo Shinshu is? Because I try to like, I think my project for this year, because I'm a Dharma school teacher for high school students and advisor for the Junior Young Buddhist Association, you know, the kids that I was chaperoning to Bixie. I think one of the things I try to have them do is to figure out their own way to explain it. Whether right, wrong, whatever, just have some place to start. And to that end, I try to say like, well, if it's Dharma school because they heard the ministers talk, then I might try to take, you know, incorporate that into whatever that Dharma lesson is, or I might take something like productivity, like how do you plan your schedule and prioritizing, and say like, okay, so you know, you are a part of a sangha, make that part of your priority so that when you plan your calendar, plug something about the sangha into that. Right? Because we teach Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Those must be the three, we call them the three treasures. They must be important. Plug the Sangha into your, like your Buddhist Sangha into your schedule every week. Something like that. Is that, that's what I kind of like, a little bit of modern or practical, but that's sort of just like trying to, yeah, what's your thoughts on like how you teach young people to adapt to learn enough Buddhism that they can define it for themselves?
I think part of it is already in your answer, is in your question. Is they have to figure it out. I think we all had to figure it out. And so you prioritize. And so it really is the relevance that's in it. But it's also the encouragement that you receive from others who you rely on. One story that I was going to get to later on was I have a friend from my early childhood. We started Betsuin's nursery school together. And so because we were best friends all the way through, even with his family, we encouraged each other. Oh, you know, let's go to this whatever at the temple all the time. So you figure it out that way. And you do run around with people who you really click with. And so it is that matter of figuring it out on your own. Another example too, though, and I've told some members here who've gone, and it's sort of an aside, they stayed with host families, either in the US or in Canada or Australia. And I asked them, are you still in contact with them? Do you still write to them? Oh, I tried, but there's no response. And so very much like this, you keep sending out messages from your side too, to try to keep them in the loop. And I said, because sometime they may have the opportunity to contact you, but because you've maintained that open mode of communication, they're still receiving it. Although for you, the person sending it out, it's not always, you really don't know. I've had several friends where for the longest time, I kept sending letters back then when we were all writing letters, but they never were returned. So I know she received them. And it wasn't until much later because she was also in her career and this and that, but we're still in touch. And so my friends now really are, a lot of them are from old time friends, so to speak.
Reverend Jean, we have one more
Yes,
question,
sure.
and then we'll have to wrap it up because it's 3:27 Hawaii time.
Okay.
But from Donna Higashi, she
Yes.
says, you mentioned transference of merit several times,
Yes.
and I think
Yes.
you compared it to the echo, which we say at the end of the sutra chanting. Could you please
Right.
clarify this again?
It's added to all sutras because it's the merit that's within the teaching itself. It's the merit of, in common terms, of participating. Its merit is formless. It's invisible, but it's something because you gain and also share and give to others. It's for your own benefit and for others' benefit. It's a teaching, is a way to say it. And so our reciting this is sort of our conviction that this is what we're trying to do here. May we awaken to it and share it with others. That's transferring it. And it is that we're transferring back and forth. So it's for one's own benefit, but also for the benefit of others.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any closing comments before I wrap things up?
Yes. One thing I didn't get to was, as we move along and we change our methods for sharing the Dharma, it's very much like this Nenju. This is one from my bachan. Years, and she took this with her when she immigrated. And it's been restrung many, many times. My auntie had me bring it to Japan so they could attach the tassels and things. So I've kept it, and it's going to go to my daughter. It's coral, but it's coral from that time, which was kind of, for many people, worthless because they were just small bits and pieces. But I found another similar one, and it was broken. And I don't mean to say that our districts overseas are broken, but they still possess the tradition in them. And so I restrung it so that it's usable for today. And it's usable by anyone, everyone. It's not a woman's Nenju anymore. And so it still retains, just as our tradition overseas, all the elements of Jodo Shinshu. The concepts have not been lost. And it's something that I use and can use on a day-to-day basis. One other thing too, I noticed in Hawaii is that the use of tropical flowers, because you're there and see it all the time, you take it for granted. And the wonderful quilting that's used for the uchishiki on the altar cloth table. So others who visit for the first time notice this, and it's like, oh wow, I guess we can do this. So it's those continuous ideas like that, keeping those things of the tradition, that's important, and incorporating other local things. This is really the making it innate for our group. One last thought is we also need to rethink some older modes of teaching that were used, such as I mentioned, my grandmother had the seventh-day services. And so for my friend who passed away during the pandemic, we did this online. In fact, they asked me to do it for them online when I introduced it to them because they realized how it helped with the bereavement, the grieving process. And it was also a way of sharing information, our tight-knitness with our families, because this is the one where we grew up from nursery school time. So need to relook at it. It's not just a formality. There's meaning behind different services, and we need to relook at it, not just get it out of the way, but actually the reasons for doing it. So that's my hope. And yes, I will volunteer to help the overseas districts, Hawaii especially, as much as I can. So I'm very honored to have been able to give this talk today. So I thank everyone that was involved with thinking of me. I was kind of scared to do it because you have such other eminent ministers that you could ask, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Sekiya, and thank you for sharing those precious onenjus with us. So, Dave, was your hand raised earlier?
Okay, just real quickly, this was at the end of our peace walk, which we do annually from the Hawaii Betsun Temple to the Nagasaki Memorial Peace Bell. And we were fortunate to receive some coverage in the Star Advertiser newspaper about it. And it was kind of interesting to me that in the caption for the photo, where we were like this in Gasho around the bell, the writer of the caption used the words, "These are the Buddhists were praying, or offering prayers." And of course, you know, depending on how you understand that term, can be appropriate, I suppose. We typically would say aspiration. So I just thought it was kind of interesting, and I'm wondering how the readers might have perceived the word prayer in that caption. Is it just a chance for us to kind of talk among ourselves about that difference? Or maybe we even have the opportunity to write a letter to the editor to kind of help explain how we think about that. That's all I wanted to say.
I think all of those, it becomes a good opportunity to explain and also state our understanding and standpoint.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. All right, thank you. Well, thank you all for attending today's lecture. We hope you found it informative and meaningful, and we would especially like to express our heartfelt gratitude to Reverend Jean Sekiya for his wonderful lecture. Reverend Sekiya, thank you for sharing your insights with us today. We sincerely appreciate your contribution to our triple celebration.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
If you are interested in our organization, please visit our website through the QR code or search for Honpa Hongwanji Mission of Hawaii. So here's the QR code. If you have any questions about our triple celebration, please contact us at triple.celebration@honpahigh.org. If you are interested, past lectures can be found on the Honpa Hongwanji Mission of Hawaii's YouTube channel. Please consider donating today, either by mail or online. We would really appreciate it. Let us close today's lecture by reading Shinran Shonin's words written in the Jodo Shinshu, which is his master work. How joyous I am, Toku Shinran, disciple of Shakyamuni. Rare is it to come upon the sacred scriptures from the westward land of India and the commentaries of the masters China and Japan. But now I have been able to encounter them. Rare is it to hear them, but already
I've been able to hear.
Reverently entrusting myself to the teaching, practice, and realization that are the true essence of the Pure Land Way, I am especially aware of the profundity of the Tathagata's benevolence. Here I rejoice in what I have heard and extol what I have attained. So today was the last in the remarkable series of the 10 Buddhist education sessions, which started back in January. A very heartfelt mahalo nui loa to those of you who faithfully attended all 10 presentations. Also, I'd like to express much appreciation to Reverend Satoshi Tomioka, who coordinated and scheduled these sessions, as well as to the Zoom management team, Reverend Daido Baba and Dave Atchison. Thank you all again for your time today. Please stay safe and healthy.